When Charles Dickens toured this abridged version of his famous tale in the 1860s and the 1870s, he began the evening with the following words. Ladies and gentlemen, the little book I have the honour of presenting to you is divided into 4 parts. I shall pause briefly before the second part. Before I begin, however, allow me to express a hope that you will be as easy and as natural with me as I shall try with all my heart to be with you, and that you will give any little emotion which the story may be so fortunate as to awaken within you the freest expression, and not to be under any misapprehension of disturbing me thereby, as nothing can be more agreeable to me than to receive any assurance that you are even the slightest bit interested. A Christmas Carol. Marley was dead, to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon anything that he put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead? Well, of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole friend, and his sole mourner. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name, however. There it stood years afterwards above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley. He answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, was Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. External heat and cold had little influence on him. No warmth could warm, no cold could chill him. No wind that blew was bitterer than he, no falling snow more intent upon its purpose, no pelting rain less open to entreaty. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "Ah, my dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and courts, and then would wag their tails, as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Now, once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, upon Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting, foggy weather, and the city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who, in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters, and Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, and in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle, God bless you," cried a cheerful voice. It was the sound of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation that Scrooge had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" "Christmas? Humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, surely?" "I do. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money, a time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer? If I had my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas upon his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should." "Uncle." "Nephew, keep your Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it, but you don't keep it." "Let me leave it alone then. Much good may it do you. Much good has it ever done you." "Uncle, there are many things from which I might have derived good by which I have not profited, I dare say, Christmas among the rest, but I am sure that I have always thought of Christmas time when it has come round, apart from the veneration due to its sacred origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow travellers to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver into my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and it will do me good, and I say God bless it. Well, the clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. "Let me hear another word from you," said Scrooge, "and you will end up keeping your Christmas and losing your position." "You are quite a powerful speaker, sir," he added, turning to his nephew. "I wonder you don't go into a parliament?" "Ha! Parliament, Uncle. There are non-entities quite enough, without me adding to their number. Come, dine with us tomorrow." Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed, he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said that he would see him in Hades first. "Oh, but why?" cried Scrooge's nephew. "Why?" "Why did you get married?" "Because I fell in love." "Because you fell in love," growled Scrooge, as if that were the only thing in the world more ridiculous than Merry Christmas. "Good afternoon." Nay, Uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it a reason for not coming now? Good afternoon." "I want nothing from you. I ask nothing from you. Why cannot we be friends?" "Good afternoon." "I am sorry, Uncle, with all my heart, to find you so resolute. We've never had any quarrel to which I have been a party. But I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I will keep my Christmas humour to the last. So, Merry Christmas, Uncle." "Good afternoon." "And a Happy New Year." "Good afternoon." His nephew left the room without an angry word, notwithstanding. Now, the clerk, letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let two other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands, and they bowed to him. "Scrooge and Marley, I believe," said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night. Well, at this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, said the gentleman, taking up a pen, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at this present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessities. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir. Are there no prisons? Well, plenty of prisons, but under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the unoffending multitude. A few of us are endeavouring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and some warmth. So, what can I put you down for? Nothing! Oh, you wish to be left alone? Oh, you wish to be anonymous? No, I wish to be left alone. Since you asked me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry either. I help to support the prisons and the workhouses. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. But many can't go there, and many would rather die. If they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. You will want all day off tomorrow, I suppose? Well, if quite convenient, sir, said the clerk. No, it's not convenient. And it's not fair. If I was to stop you half a crown for it, you'd think yourself mightily ill-used, I'll be bound. Well, yes, sir, I would, yes, I would. And you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work? Well, it's only once a year, sir. It's a poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day, but be here all the earlier the next morning. The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no greatcoat, went down a slide at the end of the lane of boys 20 times in honour of it being Christmas Eve, and then ran home as hard as he could to play blind man's buff with his family. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner, as usual, in his melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, he went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. The building was old enough now and dreary enough, and nobody lived in it but Scrooge, and the other rooms all being let out as offices. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door of his house, except that it was very large. Also that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place, and also that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London. And yet Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw the knocker without its undergoing any intermediate process of change. Not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face, with a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but it looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles, turned up upon its ghostly forehead. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. He said, "Pooh, pooh," and closed the door with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. He fastened the door, walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for its being very dark. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, yes, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. But quite satisfied, he closed the door and locked himself in, double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before the very low fire to take his gruel. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now long forgotten with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment and with a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw the bell begin to swing. And soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This was succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Then he heard the noise much louder and on the floors below, and then coming up the stairs, and then coming straight towards the door. It came through the heavy door, and a spectre passed into the room before his eyes, and upon its coming in, the dying flame leaped up as though it cried, "I know him. Marley's ghost." The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail usual waistcoat, tights and boots. His body was transparent so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on the coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he'd never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it even now, though he looked the phantom through and saw it standing before him. How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. What do you want with me?" "Much." Marley's voice, no doubt about it. Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Well, who were you then?" "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." "Well, can you sit down?" "I can." "Well, do it then." Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that in the event of it being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it. You don't believe in me? No, I don't. And what evidence would you have of my reality beyond your senses? I don't know. Why do you doubt your senses? Well, because a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheat. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, or a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy in you than of grave, whatever you are. Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is that he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his horror. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off his bandage round his head, as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped upon its breast. Mercy! Oh, dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me? Why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me? It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide, and if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. I cannot tell you all I would. A very little more is permitted to me. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me. In life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me. Oh, 7 years dead and travelling all the time. You travel fast? On the wings of the wind. Oh, you might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years. Oh, blind, blind man, not to know that ages of incessant labour by immortal creatures for this earth must pass to eternity before the good of which it is susceptible is all developed. Not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one life's opportunities misused. Yet I was like this man. I was once like this man. Oh, but you were always such a good man of business, Jacob, faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself. Business! Cried the ghost, wringing its hands again. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear the spectre going on at this rate, and began to quake exceedingly. Hear me, for my time is nearly done. Oh, no, I will, yes. But don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob, I pray. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, Ebenezer. Oh, you're always such a good friend to me, thank you. You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Oh, is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? I think I'd rather not. Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow night, when the bell tolls 1. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour, and the third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us. It walked backward from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the apparition reached it, it was wide open. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked, as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. Scrooge tried to say humbug, but he stopped at the first syllable. And being from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, he went straight to bed without undressing and fell asleep in an instant. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber, until suddenly the church clock tolled a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn aside by a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child. Its hair hung about its neck and down its back, and it was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on its skin. It had a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light. And by this light, all around the room was visible. Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold me? I am. Oh, who and what are you? I am the ghost of Christmas past. Oh, long past? No, your past. The things that you will see with me are shadows of the things that have been. They will have no consciousness of us. Scrooge then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. Your welfare. Rise. Walk with me. It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes, that the bed was warm and the thermometer a long way below freezing, and that he was clad but lightly in slippers, dressing gown and nightcap, and that he had a cold upon him at the time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window clasped its robe in supplication. I am mortal. I am liable to fall. Bear but a touch of my hand. There, said the spirit, it laying its hand upon his heart, and you shall be upheld in more than this. As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood in a busy thoroughfare of a city. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here, too, it was Christmas time. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. Oh, knew it! I was apprenticed here. They went in. At sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind such a high desk that if he'd been, 2 inches taller, he must have knocked his head against the ceiling. Scrooge cried in great excitement. That's Fezziwig! Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig alive again. Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted the capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself from his shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, "Yo-ho there! Ebenezer! Dick!" A living and moving picture of Scrooge's former self, a young man came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice. "Ho-ho! Dick Wilkins, to be sure," said Scrooge to the ghost. My old fellow apprentice. Oh, bless me, yes, there he is. Oh, he was very much attached to me, was Dick. Oh, poor Dick, dear, dear, dear." "Yo-ho, my boys," said Fezziwig. "No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up before any man can say Jack Robinson, and clear away, my lads. And let's have lots of room here." Clear away? There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. In came a fiddler with a music book and went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it and tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile, and in came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable, and in came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke, and in came all the young men and women employed in the business, and in came the housemaid with her cousin the baker, and in came the cook and her brother's particular friend the milkman, and in they all came in one after another, and away they went. 20 couples at once, hands half round, back again, and the other way round, and then down the middle and up again, and round in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter especially provided for the purpose. There were more dances, and there were forfeits and more dances, and there was cake, and there was negus, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there was, mince pies and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and the boiled, when the fiddler struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to the dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. A positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance. You couldn't have predicted at any given time what would become of them next. And when old Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig had gone all through the dance, advance and retire, turn your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle and back again, Fezziwig cut. He cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs. When the clock struck 11, the domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, and on either side of the door they shook hands with every person individually as he or she went out, and wished them a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the 2 apprentices, they did the same to them, and thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a counter in the back of the shop. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?" "It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark. "No," and speaking unconsciously like his former, not his latter self. "No, it's not that, it's not that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune. He felt the spirit's glance and stopped. What is the matter? Nothing particular. Something, I think. No, I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now. That is all. My time grows short, observed the spirit. Quick! This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect, for again he saw himself, and he was older now, a man in the prime of his life. He was not alone, but he sat by the side of a fair young girl in a black dress, and in whose eyes were tears. It matters little, she said softly to Scrooge's former self. To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve. Well, what idol has displaced you? A golden one. You fear the world too much. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you. Have I not? Well, what then? I mean, even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I'm not changed towards you. Have I ever sought release from our engagement? In words, no, never. Well, in what then? In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end. If you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can even I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl? Or choosing her, do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do, and I release you with a full heart for the love of him who you once were. Spirit! Remove me from this place. I told you. These were shadows of the things that have been, said the ghost. That they are what they are. Do not blame me. No, remove me, Scrooge exclaimed. I cannot bear it. Leave me, take me back. Haunt me no longer. As he struggled with the spirit, he was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bedroom. He had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. Scrooge awoke in his own bedroom. There was no doubt about that. But it and his own adjoining sitting room, into which he shuffled in his slippers, attracted by a great light there, had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and the ceilings were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove. The leaves of holly, mistletoe and ivy reflected back the light as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that hearth had never known in Scrooge's time or Marley's time for many, many a winter season gone. Heaped upon the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, brawn, great joints of meat, suckling pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense twelfth cakes, and great bowls of punch. And in easy state, upon this couch there sat a giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch, and who raised it high to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door. Come in, and know me better, man. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me, you've never seen the like of me before.
Oh, no, never.
Have never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning, for I am very young, my elder brothers born in these later years, pursued the phantom.
Oh, I don't think I have. I'm afraid I have not. Have you many brothers, Spirit?
More than 1,800.
Oh, it's a tremendous family to provide for. But, Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learnt a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it.
Touch my robe. Scrooge did as he was told and held it fast. The room and its contents all vanished instantly, and they stood in the city streets upon a snowy Christmas morning. Scrooge and the ghost passed on, invisible, straight to Scrooge's clerks, and on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinkling of his torch. Think of that. Bob had but 15 bob a week himself, and yet the ghost of Christmas present blessed his 4-roomed house. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for 6pence, and she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into a saucepan of potatoes. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and known it for their own, and basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onions, these young Cratchits danced about the table and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies, while he blew the fire until the slow potatoes, bubbling up, knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and to be peeled.
Oh, well, whatever's got to your precious father, then, said Mrs. Cratchit, and your brother, Tiny Tim and Martha? They weren't as late as this last Christmas Day by half an hour. Here's Martha, mother, said a girl, appearing as she spoke. Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are, said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing her a dozen times and taking off her shawl and her bonnet for her. Oh, no, never mind. So long as you are come, said Mrs. Cratchit. Sit ye down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm. Oh, Lord bless ye. No, there's father coming, cried the 2 young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. Hide, Martha, hide! So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame.
Why, where's our Martha? Cried Bob Cratchit, looking round.
Oh, she's not coming,
said Mrs. Cratchit. Not coming, said Bob, with a sudden declension in his high spirits. Not coming on Christmas Day. Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, if it were only even as a joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the 2 young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off into the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper.
"And how did little Tiny Tim behave?" asked Mrs. Cratchit. "Oh, he was as good as gold," said Bob, "and better. Somehow he gets so thoughtful sitting by himself so much and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me, coming home, that he hoped the people saw him in the church because he was disabled, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made the lame beggars walk and the blind men see." Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and his sister to his stool beside the fire. Master Peter and the two young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy hissing hot, Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigour, and Miss Belinda sweetened up the apple sauce. Martha dusted the hot plates, and Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at a table. At last the dishes were set on and grace was said, and it was succeeded by a breathless pause as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the breast. And when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all around the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, he beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there was ever such a goose. Everyone had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. But now the plates were being changed by Miss Melinda, and Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witnesses, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding. It was like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing and with ignited brandy and bedight with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Oh, it was a wonderful pudding. Bob Cratchit said, and calmly too, that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. At last the dinner was all done, and the cloth was cleared, and the hearth swept, and the fire made up, and then all the Cratchits' family drew round the hearth, in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, and at his elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears, God bless us," which all the family re-echoed. "God bless us, every one," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered hand in his as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that he might be taken from him. Scrooge raised his head speedily on hearing his own name. "Mr. Scrooge," said Bob, I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of this feast." "Ha! Founder of the feast, indeed," cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it." "My dear," said Bob, "the children? Christmas Day?" "It should be Christmas Day, I as sure," said she, "on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow." "My dear," was Bob's mild answer, "Christmas Day." "Well, I'll drink his health for your sake, and the day's," said Mrs. Cratchit, "but not for his." The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness in it.
Tiny Tim drank it last of all. Scrooge was indeed the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes. The chestnuts and the jug went round, and by they had a song about a lost child travelling in the snow from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice and sang it very well indeed. Now, there was nothing of high mark in this. They were a handsome family. They were not well dressed, clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful. They were pleased with one another and contented with the time, and when they faded and looked happier yet in the bright sprinklings of the spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, as this scene vanished, to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognise it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, gleaming room, with the spirit standing smiling by his side and looking at the same nephew. It is a fair and even-handed, noble adjustment of things, that while there is infection in disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humour. When Scrooge's nephew laughed, Scrooge's niece by marriage laughed as heartily as he, and their assembled friends, being not a bit behindhand, laughed also out loud and lustily. He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live, cried Scrooge's nephew. And he believed it too. Oh, more shame for him, Fred, said Scrooge's niece indignantly. And she was pretty, exceedingly pretty, with a dimpled, surprised-looking, capital face. Oh, he's a comical old fellow, said Scrooge's nephew. That is the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offences that carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always. Here he takes into his head to dislike us, and he won't come and dine with us. Well, what's the consequence? You don't lose much of a dinner. Oh, indeed, I think he loses a very good dinner, interrupted Scrooge's niece. Everybody else said the same. After tea, they had some music, for they were a musical family and knew what they were about. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. After a while, they played at forfeits, for it is good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. It was a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something and the rest must find out what. He only answering to their questions yes or no, as the case was. The fire of questioning to which he was exposed elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal, a live animal, a rather disagreeable animal, a savage animal that growled and grunted sometimes and lived in London and was not a horse or an ass or a cow or a bear. And at every new question put to him, this nephew burst into a fresh roar of laughter, and at last the plump sister cried out, I found out, I know what it is, Fred, I know what it is. What is it? Cried Fred. It is your Uncle Scrooge, which it certainly was. Admiration was the universal sentiment, though some objected that the reply to is it a bear ought to have been yes. Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have drank to the unconscious company, but the whole scene passed off in the breath of the last words spoken by his nephew, and he and the spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirit stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful. On foreign lands, and they were close to home. In almshouse, hospital, and jail, in misery's every refuge, he left his blessing and taught Scrooge his precepts. And suddenly, as they stood together in an open place, the bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it no more. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the air through which the spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved. I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come. Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from whom I was, I am prepared to bear you company, and I do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me? It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them. Oh, well, lead on, lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time, I know. Lead on, spirit. They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them. But there they were in the heart of it, and amongst the merchants. The spirit stopped beside the little knot of businessmen, observing that the hand was pointed to them, and Scrooge advances and listened to their talk. No, said a great fat man with a monstrous chin. No, I don't know much about him either way. All I know is that he's dead. When did he die? Inquired another. Last night, I believe. Oh, well, what was the matter with him? I thought he'd never die. Oh, God knows, said the first with a yawn. Well, what's he done with his money? Asked a red-faced gentleman. Well, I haven't heard, said the man with the large chin. Company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me. That's all I know. Bye-bye. Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to a conversation apparently so trivial. It could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was in the past, and this ghost's province was the future. He looked about in that very place for his own image, but another man stood in his accustomed place. It gave him little surprise, however, for he had been resolving in his mind a change of life, and he thought and hoped that he saw his newborn resolutions carried out in this. They left this busy scene and went into an obscure part of the town to a low shop where iron and old rags and bottles and bones and greasy offal were bought. A grey-haired rascal of great age sat smoking his pipe. Scrooge and the phantom came into the presence of this man just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black. "Let the charwoman alone be first, Joe," cried she who had entered first. Let the laundress alone be the second, and let the undertaker's man be the third." "Well, you couldn't have met in a better place," said Joe, the old rascal with the pipe. "Well, what have you got to sell then? What have you got to sell?" "Half a minute's patience, and you shall see. Every person has a right to take care of himself. He always did. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose. If he wanted to keep 'em after he was dead, a wicked old screw, why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been natural and kind, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying, gasping out his last there all alone by himself." Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening the bundle, and dragged out a large and heavy roll of some dark stuff. "What do you call this? Bed curtains? And are these his blankets?" "Well, whose else do you think?" Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. Spirit, I think I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. And merciful heaven, what is this?" The scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bare, uncurtained bed. A pale light rising in the outer air fell straight upon this bed, and on it, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this plundered, unknown man. "Spirit, oh, let me see some tenderness connected with a death, or this dark chamber spirit will be forever present to me." The ghost conducted him to poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and he found the mother and the children seated round the fire. Quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in needlework, but surely they were very quiet. "And he took a child and set him in the midst of them," read Peter. Where had Scrooge heard those words? He'd not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out as he and the spirit crossed the threshold. Well, why didn't he go on? The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hand up to her face. "The colour black, it hurts my eyes," she said. The colour black. Ah, poor Tiny Tim. But they're better now. It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near his time." "Ah, and there he is. There's your father at the door," said Mrs. Cratchit. She hurried out to meet him, and Bob, in his comforter, he had need of it, poor fellow, came in. And then the two young Cratchits got upon his knees and laid each child a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, father. Don't be grieved." Bob was very cheerful with them and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and the speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, he said. "Sunday? So you went today then, Robert?" "Yes, my dear," returned Bob. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday with you. He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child would have been farther apart perhaps than they were. "Spectre? Oh," said Scrooge, "something informs me that our parting moment
is at hand. Tell me what man that was with the covered face, with whom I saw lying there dead. The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him to a dismal, wretched, ruinous graveyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. Before I draw near, and near to that stone to which you point, will you answer me one question? Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they the shadows of the things that may be only? Still the ghost pointed to the grave by which it stood. Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends to which, if persevered in, they must lead. But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus, what you show me? The spirit was as immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. Am I that man who lay upon the bed? No, no, spirit. No, hear me. I'm not the man I was. Why show me this? If I am past all hope, assure me that I may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life. For the first time, the kind hand faltered. I will honour Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all year. I will live in the past, the present and the future, and the spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Tell me I may sponge away the writing on that stone. Holding up his hands in one last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own, and the bed was his own, and the room was his own, and best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in. He was checked in his transports by the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, no night, clear, bright, stirring golden day. What's today? Cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes. Aye? What's today, my fine fellow? Well, today is Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. Hello, my fine fellow. Hello. Now, do you know the poulterer's in the next street but one? The one at the corner? Well, I should hope I did. Oh, an intelligent boy. A very intelligent and remarkable boy. Now, do you know whether they've sold the prime turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one. What, the one as big as me? What a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck. Well, it's hanging there now. Is it? We'll go and buy it. I am in earnest. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here and that I may give them the direction where to take it, and come back with the man and I will give you a shilling, and come back with him in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you half a crown. The boy was off like a shot. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's, and he shan't half know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did, somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. It was a turkey. He never could have stood upon his legs, that bird. Scrooge dressed himself all in his best, and at last got out into the streets.
The people were by this time pouring forth as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present, and walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded everyone with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that 3 or 4 good-humoured fellows said, "Morning, sir! Merry Christmas to you!" And Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, those were the blithest in his ears. In the afternoon, he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock. But he made a dash, and he did it. "Is your master at home, my dear?" said Scrooge to the girl at the door.
"Oh, yes, sir."
"Well, where is he, my love?"
"Oh, he's in the dining room, sir, along with the mistress."
"Oh, he knows me," said Scrooge, with his hand already on the dining room lock. "I will go in here, my dear." "Ha! Why, bless my soul," cried Fred. "And who is that?" "It is I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?" Let him in. It is a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office the next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late, that was the thing that he'd set his heart on. And he did it. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. Bob was a full 18 minutes late. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come into the tank. Bob's hat was off before he opened the door. His comforter too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. "Hello?" growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it, anyway. "And what do you mean by coming here at this time of day?" "Oh, I'm very sorry, sir. I am behind my time." "You are, yes, you are. I think you are. Step this way, if you please." "Oh, no, it's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir." "Now, I tell you what, my friend, I'm not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore," Scrooge continued, leaping from his stool and giving Bob such a dig in his waistcoat that he staggered back into the tank again, "and therefore, I'm about to raise your salary." Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. "A Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge, with an earnestness that could not be mistaken as he clapped him on the back. A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I shall raise your salary and endeavour to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy a second coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, and as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but his own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived in that respect upon the total abstinence principle for ever afterwards. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us, and all of us, And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone.